Bojo, Wabananong Indigenous, Jekaning and Dunjaba. Hello, Pakutiple is my name. Wabananong means the morning star. I'm from Bay Mills Indian community, and I'm glad to be here. I'd like to just lay the groundwork a little bit about how the folks from Australia got to be here, and it might take just a couple of minutes of your time for that. Last year, about this time, I got a call from my nephew. He says, "I'm coming over for omelets." So I thought, okay. He likes my omelets, and he thinks I'm a fairly decent cook. That's as much as he knows. But he come on over, and with him he brought a friend. And that friend was Don Lyons. Don is an Anishinaabe person from the Leech Lake Reservation in Minnesota. Both those young men are active in our communities. They've worked on Three Fires projects. They've worked on many other projects throughout the Indian communities. They're graduates and working on graduate level degrees at Michigan State University. But when they come over for the omelets, Don asked, after eating the omelet and visiting for a little while, he brought out a photograph, not a photograph, but a painting. And it was done by John Hunter. And it was a collaborative effort by John and he. He said that he had went over to Australia and attended school there in Sydney. And while there, he had met John. He said he didn't like John very much because John looked mean to him. Even after meeting him several different times, he still said that John looked mean to him. So he kind of kept his distance for quite some time, but he eventually came around. John and he had the collaborative effort on the painting that I was shown. That was during the spring break, and I went to Michigan State to meet with both Ozzy and Don. And getting back to the omelet. Well, anyway, while having the omelet, Don says, "You want to go to Australia?" Without even thinking, I said, "Yeah. When do we go?" So with that, we start working at planning for this trip to Australia. And on the 1st of October, this past fall, both Don and I left Chicago, flew to LAX, flew to Brisbane, then back to Fiji, then back to Brisbane, and finally met up with John. While there, we both got interviewed a little bit, and Don had bought himself one of our hand drums, and it was quarantined and taken from us, so we weren't able to use that hand drum. We eventually did pick up another hand drum, but the one that we bought was quarantined. We got picked up by John, and then we were taken up the coast from Brisbane on a 3-day journey on driving with John. I always attempted to get in on the driver's side. So on that journey, we eventually made it to a small town called Cardwell. And in Cardwell, they had a conference that was going on in which Don and I were invited to speak at. And that conference was Caring for Country, looking after the land, seas, and the resources of their communities there in Australia. I believe that was only the second time that all of the Aboriginal folks from around Australia come together for a large conference like that. And I was really fortunate and felt really honored to be a part of that. When we did get into Australia, I carried with me our pipe from the Great Lakes region, the pipe that I carry, and along with the drum, was able to make it through without the drum, but we did manage to get through with the pipe. We met in Brisbane some of the traditional owners and asked for permission to smoke our pipe, asked for permission to be on their territories and to talk in their territory, in their customs and in their manners. and we were given the opportunity to do so. When we got to Brisbane, or Cardwell, we were welcomed by the elders there, and to show their support for us, they stayed on stage with us during our presentation there in Cardwell. We gave a presentation about the problems, the issues of land, water, treaties here in the Great Lakes region. Many of those issues, as we sat through that 3 days of conferences there, were the very same kind of issues that the Aboriginal folks were facing in Australia. So we got a real good feel for how things were going in Australia in terms of the issues. Got to see the diversity of people from the Aboriginals, from the totally assimilated to the totally militant. You know, just like us, we have those that want to be totally assimilated and those that want to be totally militant and away from everything. So got to have a taste of all of that in that conference, and it was really eye-opening for me in that they were experiencing the same kind of issues and problems that we were experiencing and are still experiencing here in North America and Canada as well. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to John Hunter. He's reciprocating and bringing, being a host over here with us and being a part of the Earth Day activities here in Northern Michigan University, and I'm glad to be a part of helping to host him.
Which, well, going back to that angry part, that's where I'll start. For us as Aboriginal people in Australia, it's very important to follow protocol. And when I seen Don Lyons in our Aboriginal Centre, and it was our Aboriginal Centre where the Aboriginal students come to use our equipment and facilities to study, he'd come in and he was there with the other Aboriginal students, and we as Aboriginal students on campus are pretty strong. We try to look after each other and work together because that's the only way we can get through. I mean, much of the time we struggle in the mainstream. And I looked at this man in the corner using our equipment, and I nodded my head and said hello. And for us, the protocol is to explain where we come from and see how we are related to each other. But this bloke in the corner just kept on typing. I thought, gee, he's a bit of a nerd, this bloke. He just keeps on, every time I see him, he's just studying. Because I don't like to study all the time. We're on Murray time. Murray time is a concept that relates to doing things when it's meant to happen. So anyway, I've seen him a few times and nodded, and the next time I seen him was at the Opera House in Sydney, and there was an Indigenous film festival, and I seen him there, and I called out. I said, hey, trying to look as mean as possible. And he turned around, and I walked up to him and said, hey, brother, where's your people from? And then when he replied, he shocked me, because he came out with this funny accent. I said, where's this fella from? I said, where are you from, brother? He said, I'm Anishinaabe from Michigan. I said, oh, well, brother, why didn't you come in and tell us that? So when we found out where we come from, I took him around and introduced him to all my community. And I come from the biggest urban Aboriginal community in Australia. In Western Sydney, there's about 20,000 Aboriginal people. We're from all different places. Most of us ended up there. Our families ended up there because it's a big public housing complexes. And many of the people moved from the bush and off the reserves because the government was trying to close the reserves and into the urban sprawl. So I took him out to the community and introduced him to our elders, and everybody was very, very pleased to meet him, and they welcomed him. And we took him up into the Blue Mountains to the Cultural Centre, and I think he really enjoyed himself. And he's seen another side of us, and the side that he's seen was like a mirror, because every time he looked at us, he's seen himself and he's seen his own people. And on the last day, I cooked up some kangaroo for him. And I'd already cooked, and I went down to get him, and we walked. And I lived on a hill, And we walked up that hill. And that walk up that hill and the discussion we had brought us here today. And on that walk, we reflected on how close our people are and the aspirations our communities have and how important it is to care for our culture in our country and our community and to walk in the way of our ancestors in a good way and use the knowledge of the past and use the knowledge we have today and mould it and hammer it into a new way for everybody. So we connected, and I adopted him as one of my people, and now he has more than one totem, and he's a black snake man too, because my people are black snakes, so he's not just a bear, he's a black snake. But we continue to talk, and me as an Indigenous land management facilitator in Brisbane, I managed to get a position and moved up, and we spoke about the conference, and he said to me that he wanted an elder to come along. So he said, "Oh, I found this old bloke with grey hair. He seems like an elder to me." So, no, I was only joking. But he had invited Bucko to come along, and we were very happy. And we've done a lot of work to get them guys across, and we've done a lot of work to host them. And the first thing obviously was when they arrived, for them to be introduced to the traditional owners. And usually I talk in Anishinaabe Mawin, because Bucko took me over to his community into Bay Mules in an immersion program, and we learn a bit of his language. And then our protocol is to talk the language of our hosts, of the traditional owners in the country we live in, so that the spirits and the ancestors in the community know that we're here as guests. But today I felt all I had to do was say thank you, because Bucko is with us, and we are a part of Bucko's community. We're here hosted by him and his community. So when we are a part of each other. So when I speak with permission of the traditional owners. So I'm happy, and all our delegation is happy that we've done things in a good way. So continuing on, Bucko and Don had come up and spoke in Cardwell, and they spoke very, very well. And the things that they spoke of hammered a path out and there were stepping stones in the path. And that path was to get our peoples to collaborate and work together and build new alliances for tomorrow, new alliances for the 7 generations ahead of us. And those alliances relate to our spirituality, our language and culture, and the health of the land, caring for community, caring for country. And it's not just about our identity and our grandchildren and children, but it's about the well-being of the planet and the well-being of all people. Because community is not about black, white or brindle. Community is about people working together and living together. And country is the thing that sustains us all. So on this journey, the Anishinaabe people gave us an invitation to come across and talk to the communities about what we're doing. So that's why we are here. And I'm here initially it was a delegation of 5, but one of our colleagues, my countryman from my tribe, Gamarai people, had to go home. He had responsibilities in the community, so there's one short. But we're here today to talk about the things that are important for us as Indigenous people. So I'd like to introduce Brad Lewis to take the next part of this session. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, John and Bucko, for the introductions. One of the things in Australia that we do now, and government officers as well as community people alike, is we pay our respects and we acknowledge the traditional owners, the custodians of the country that we're talking on. So just pay my respects to the Anishinaabe people as well. It's been a pretty long journey so far. To get here wasn't easy, and there's some learning in that for all of us. Sometimes when you've got a bit of a vision, you've got to sit down and think about the little steps that are going to take you there, and get on with it, and partner with people that you can work with. So you're seeing that in action, that philosophy today. And as John said, we really appreciate being here and being welcomed by the Anishinaabe people to talk. I'll just give a little bit of a background and context in the broader sense of some of the things that the Australian government is doing. Set the scene a little bit for you, for some of you who might not know much about Australia. and then create a bit of a linkage to some of the great work that is happening in Australia at the moment, community-led and community-driven, around managing traditional knowledge. You can see, this is actually from a national park in the far north of Australia. It's called Kakadu National Park. This is a big sandstone escarpment. It's one of the biggest national parks in Australia. It's a massive wetland area. Keep pressing the button up there a bit, Barry. There's a little bit of extra text there. Australia's a very diverse place in terms of rainfall. We have some of the centres in the desert country there where there's very little rainfall, maybe a couple of inches a year maximum, and some of that would probably be dewdrops. To other areas, people like Barry and Victor you'll hear talking a little later this evening perhaps, where maybe 6 foot of rain a year and above potentially. So very diverse country, very diverse ecosystems as well, very specialised ecosystems. So above 80% of the mammals and a fair percentage of the plant life as well is found nowhere else in the world. So very unique. I'm sure you're probably quite familiar with a lot of those species already. Picture the platypus there, which is one of the mammals. There's only 2 mammals in the world that lay eggs. The platypus is one, and the echidna, which is a little bit like a porcupine, is the other. And of course the marsupials with their pouches and a lot of nocturnal animals. This just gives you a little bit of background of some of the threats that we face in Australia. It's a vulnerable landscape because perhaps the way things have been managed in the last 200 years since colonisation, there's a lot of pests. Brumbies, for example, we all love horses, but in the Australian outback they are actually a pest. They cause a lot of damage and they compete for water and food resources with the native animals. The camels up there, we've got about population of 1 million camels in Australia. They're big and they do a lot of damage and they're very competitive. If there's a thirsty camel in your neighbourhood, you know about it. So some of those very subtle, sensitive desert ecosystems, if the camels are in there sort of taking water and food, that's direct competition with the native flora and fauna. Foxes down here as well. There's a heap of others. Feral cats. Cats can be nice and lovely, but when they get loose in these sensitive ecosystems, they're little killers. Lizards, birds, don't have much chance. So Australia, roughly the size of the United States, for those of you that don't know. You'll hear us talking about Queensland a lot this evening. So Queensland's that top state up in the right-hand corner there. Remember that the further north you go is closer to the equator, so it's hot at the top of the map. And Victor and Barry, that's probably where they're from, up around that top bit, just where the sort of the pink and the dark are meeting up. John and myself are based in Brisbane. It's the biggest, probably the third biggest city, about 1 million, maybe 1.2 million people. Quite a flat country is the other reason I wanted to show that map. There's a few mountains down in the southeast where there's snow, but for the large majority it's quite a flat country, indicating the geological age. It's probably one of the oldest countries in the world in terms of geological age. All of the mountains are very rounded and it's very flat, and there's some desert countries. And that big lake in the middle, Lake Eyre, it's actually dry most of the time. So maybe once every 5-6 years it fills with water. The rest of the time it's a little bit more like a salt pan. It's actually below sea level. So the water's drained into that place and it evaporates. But it's a very important wetland and also very important culturally and spiritually to the Indigenous people. This is just a little bit of an indication of some of the land uses that we face in Australia. There's been an extensive industrial development in Australia, a lot of mining. So mining up here is sort of bluey. It's not all that clear. You'll see lots of scatters of purple around and etc. The white, which is extensive, is actually grazing. So that's extensive beef, cattle and sheep. The yellow is extensive cropping. So we've got a lot of citrus and other grains. Up in the far north, which isn't showing up that well, there's quite extensive sugarcane areas. All of these things have made Australia a very productive landscape economically, but it's taken its toll on the natural environment. And I guess one of the key things the Australian government is trying to do these days is try and get that balance. And we've got a lot of work to do. This map's a little bit old, so in some cases it's a little deceptive, but it talks about Aboriginal owned and controlled land in Australia. The green and the yellow in the middle of the map indicates where there has been significant land handovers to Indigenous people already. And as we said, this is the same size as the United States. So there's a fair bit of territory that's controlled and managed by Indigenous people in Australia. Makes them major stakeholders in terms of land management decisions, of course. Other areas, and Barry might talk about this a little later, up in the north of Queensland and various other places. But similar to the history of Native America, there's tribes that have traditional connection to all of these places. There's over 500 tribes in Australia, 100 different language groups, completely separate and distinct language groups. So you can see that some groups aren't recognised there as having traditional or at least contemporary ownership or management rights to their country. So that's a real issue, creates issues around access, creates issues around land use being balanced with cultural aspirations and obligations. One of the things that's been happening in Australia over recent years is a move towards a regional model for natural resource management. So we've got state governments, and we've got the Australian government, and we've got local governments. One of the things that hasn't been happening that well is management at the catchment scale, and that's what this map introduces. Australian government, the federal government at least, and the state governments have all agreed, in bipartisan support, to move to a model where we set up organisations at the regional scale, basically managing catchments or a series of catchments. And we've moved to a system of target-based planning. So basically, for every one of those little areas, you can see every catchment since about 2002, a target-based NRM or Natural Resource Management Plan has been developed, which sets goals and targets for things like water quality and salinity and biodiversity, things like ground cover, for example, percentage of ground cover, things around weed management. So rather than just regulating behaviours and enforcing and compliance, we're actually setting ourselves targets now, 5-year targets, 25-year targets, 50-year targets. And that starts to galvanise effort around research and policy, etc. There's a lot of questions we don't know the answers for. Setting a water quality target is a very difficult thing. We've got a lot of ephemeral systems, so that means that they're not always filled with water. You might get an inundation event maybe once a year. So getting the data to establish a baseline and then working out what an appropriate environmental target is quite a complex task, and we're all learning about that. But the philosophy behind it is we start learning, and that we work in adaptive management. We try to improve what we do. These are just some of the things that are happening at the moment. New Caring for Our Country program, the new government came to power in about December. These are the priorities. So it's trying to get a balance between sustainable farming practice as well as managing the environment and biodiversity. Feral animals are right up there. You can see National Reserve System, community skills and engagement and knowledge, capacity building. That's a strong focus, whether it's land managers, whether it's government itself, learning how to do business a little bit better, whether it's the research community, whether it's Indigenous groups, volunteer groups, etc. Just a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we're investing in. Expansion of Indigenous Protected Areas program. So that's a program where Indigenous groups are supported to own and manage land. We've got programs around environmental stewardship as well. Increasingly governments are realising that Indigenous peoples are the ones on country that have a real connection and obligation to care for that country. In some cases, farmers and the broader community also has that relationship. It's important to acknowledge that. When we talk about things like unemployment in Indigenous communities, well, there's an obvious opportunity there to work with communities as stewards of the land. So things like pests and weeds that we have big problems with in Australia, opportunity for partnership. This is a project, there's a lot of examples of projects where the Australian government has worked successfully with Aboriginal communities. This is probably one of the most well-known, won numerous awards. relates to a phenomena that we have in the north of Australia. Maybe you can imagine a 3 or 4 or 5 mile long net that would be used for fishing. Sometimes those things get tangled on reefs, and so a lot of the fishermen just cut them loose and they just drift through the sea. We call them ghost nets. And that some cases that would be Australian fishermen, but in a lot of cases it's actually people from the Pacific countries. And we just inherit the problem. They just kill everything in their wake, and there's thousands of these things, and they are about 4 or 5 kilometres long. Brings me to the topic of traditional knowledge, which is what you're going to be hearing more about this evening. An exciting methodology, very engaging for communities, and it's community-owned and driven, and Victor will tell you all about it. The Australian government has actually supported the project to take off in about 7 communities in Queensland. So when you're hearing Victor talking, the Australian government has seen fit to invest in that methodology and support a number of communities to take that approach forward. This sort of gives you a bit of an idea. It's probably a bit hard to sort of describe if you can't read it, but basically it gives you a balance between desert and inland communities and some of the coastal communities in the north, rainforest areas, etc. So those are projects that we're all trying to support as best we can. But it's important to recognise that communities are the ones that have really pushed that and identified the opportunity. Just a little bit further there, Barry, I'll just give you just a couple more little bits of information why the Australian government is interested in getting involved with these sorts of projects. We've signed a number of conventions. I'm sure the guys will probably explain there's a couple of significant Indigenous conventions that we haven't signed, but 2 that we have is about the United Nations. Back a couple. 2 more. Yep, there. These are the things that this is the formal reason that gives the Australian government, I guess, it's an obligation, really, to be involved in some of this sort of work. And I'm not going to read them out here. You can take a note and have a bit of a read of them yourselves. So the Convention on Biological Diversity, and there's also the Rio Declaration, talks about the preeminent role of Indigenous communities in managing their own knowledge. You might just go to the next page there, Barry. In the Australian context, we also have a national strategy for the conservation of Australia's biological diversity. And we have clauses in there which talk about the Australian government's commitment to have Indigenous engagement and involvement. There's a lot of people who can level some criticism at this. It perhaps doesn't go far enough. It is a first step, and it's all under review as we speak, and I guess all of this is a work in progress. But nevertheless, that is one of the sort of, I guess, the heads of power of why we'd be interested. Just next page there. And this is what, when the Australian government is funding these sorts of projects, these are some of the things that we're interested in. There's land management outcomes. There's an increasing awareness. I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of Aboriginal communities myself, and I appreciate the wisdom and the extensive knowledge that communities do have, and the opportunities for respectful partnerships. Not everyone in government has that awareness, let's be honest. But there is an increasing awareness, as scientists, for example, try and grapple with understanding the Australian environment. Meanwhile, all the pressures of environmental degradation and climate change are impacting the Australian environment. Increasingly, there is an awareness that Aboriginal people hold a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and why wouldn't they? They've lived there for 40, 50, 60, 100,000 years or more. And the relationships, I think, was mentioned between the various ecosystems is something a lot of white scientists and Western science, I should say more broadly, is just guessing at, and perhaps we don't really have time. So that's why we've managed to get government support for these sorts of projects, is that linkage. It sometimes gets a little bit more confused because government sometimes doesn't integrate its efforts very well. And so you get questions about, is this an educational type project? Perhaps it should be funded through the education portfolio. Is it an arts project? Perhaps it should be funded through the arts project portfolio, etc., etc. But anyway, it's very exciting that some of these projects have been finished, or that are being funded. And just one more quick thing. I'll just give you a quick history of Australia for those of you that don't know in terms of colonisation. About 200 years ago, the British did come to Australia and they set up a colony in Sydney, and various other colonies came thereafter. The one big difference, I think, that happened in Australia that didn't happen perhaps in the United States, there was never actually any formal treaties with the Indigenous people of the land. So that's an important difference. When the British Crown exerted sovereignty over the lands of Australia, it declared the land a terra nullius, which basically means empty land or vacant land. So the traditional people were never actually acknowledged as having any traditional laws or traditional customs or traditional associations with land at all. So these days, you've still got that legacy in policy making, etc. Indigenous people are often struggling to get a voice in these sorts of decisions. But anyway, that's just a bit of background for you. You'll hear now from Victor, who I'll just invite to come down and take a lead with the presentation. And he can tell you about some of the exciting work that is happening with communities, managing knowledge, recording knowledge. And some of it's all really fun, you know, communities making movies and documentaries and comedies and things like that. Oh, it looks like Barry might be talking next. So yeah, let me hand over to Barry. John, myself and Barry all work in a network of natural resource management facilitators. And so that's how we come to be working on these sorts of projects together. I try and help get these projects aligned with broader government and, you know, research institutions and help these guys with what they've got to do. I have an overarching focus on water, and they help me. So, yeah, we work together. Here's Barry Hunter.
Thanks, Brad. I just want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that we're speaking on, and also to Bucko and he mentioned Don, as well as our host, who have welcomed us warmly here in the US. Brad just mentioned that our role, myself and John and Brad, as facilitators, and primarily John and I, our role is to engage traditional owners within the process that Brad just spoke of. There's a number of ways that we do that. One is to try and influence policy and procedure, and quite often that's a job in itself. But the other part of it is to be able to, and that word engagement is pretty broad, is to get the mob. And when I talk about the mob, because I had a question on it before, I'm referring to Aboriginal people, and that's a term that we use in Australia, describing our people, is to get the mob engaged in the process by just spreading information, talking, and providing the relevant information. Can I just go back to the first slide, please, Vic? And basically, we see it as a three-tiered structure. One is to get country-based plans at a community level, to develop regional plans, and Brad showed you that you see that mosaic of different colours there in the state of Queensland. We've got 14 regions in Queensland. So being able to have those plans for traditional owner engagement that spell out traditional owner aspirations on how they want to be engaged in this process, and then for it to fit into with the national priorities. This is just quickly just a map of Australia, and up the top there you can see your home, and that's the area that I work in. So that's just a slide of Cape York, the area that I work in. It's probably bigger than the size of Michigan, the state of Michigan, but not nearly as many people. You've got an area that size that roughly 19,000 people live in. 13,000 of those 19,000 identify as Indigenous. It's an area that take, like from where home is there near Cairns, the big regional centre. It'll take me 10 hours to drive to Arapoon, 14 to the top, predominantly sort of 3/4 of the way up. It's all gravel road from there on. So the remoteness of the communities and the fact that particularly along this west coast and patches along the east coast and in the centre, Aboriginal people are major landholders. So there's a myriad of management issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but also being able to, just the distance alone is hard to be able to engage people in any processes. It's just an indication of a community. That's the community of Arapoon. a community of 1,300 people during this time of the year, dry season. People start leaving town roughly now to go out into outstations where they live around the wetlands and different areas on the community, and the population of the community will swell and dwindle according to the season. But you can see the dirt road that leads into there. And the only access during the wet is the air, by air or barge. Victor will talk about the management and where TKRP is going. My main aspect, and I mentioned before about the regional plans and the country-based plans, is to be able to take examples and you'll see from Victor's talk in regards to producing management reports, is to take traditional knowledge and aspirations and present those as a basis for where investment should go. So that's predominantly where my work is. It's around getting things like this, and a couple of years ago, like the evidence was getting people talking and presenting to government on what their needs were. But this is providing us with another mechanism. One, the evidence is there in regards to the traditional knowledge, and that's showing where the issue is. Two, it's in a language that a lot of government people understand, and it's in a format they understand. It's in a report. The other way around, some of the reports that they produce, the use of them is some of them are just propping up tables. That's how useful they are in communities. So being able to find that medium ground and find that what Victor calls shared knowledge, and he'll talk about that, but being able to present that as aspirations, but also the issues where investment needs to go, and in order to address the issues. Keep going, next one. I guess when we talk about land management, I just want to point out that on that region there, in some of the communities, there's 80% unemployment, and there's some serious social issues, including with alcohol and all the other things that come with not having a job and not having, I suppose, some self-worth. So being able to work within the area that we work in is really important. I was part of a employment survey in another life when I worked as a consultant, and in a number of the communities that we surveyed, within those communities, 80% of people said that they want to work in something related to culture and land or on country. So there's an overwhelming statement in regards to the aspirations of people there. So it's more or less being able to take those aspirations, like I said, and then find a form or format for them, and being able to get the resources to make it work. But it's not only resources, it's about developing capabilities and capacity within communities around good governance, around skills, so that the mob on the ground then have the ability to go out and then they can seek real jobs, or they can play an active role in looking after their important country. It's on that note that I want to introduce Victor Steffensen. And Victor will talk about the key aspects. It's one of the projects that I've supported over the last couple of years, and in regards to finding the resources for, and that's the Traditional Knowledge Revival Pathways. So I'll invite Victor down just to come down and talk about that.
It's hard work when you're the technician and the presenter at the same time, eh? Running down. But anyway, my name is Victor Steffensen. I'm descendant of Takalak people in the Golden area, where my grandmother's from, and also a representative of Wolaya people as well. Basically, I manage the Traditional Knowledge Revival Pathways project, and that project is a community-based project developed from grassroots methodologies in terms of recording our traditional knowledge and re-implementing that traditional knowledge back on the country and into community. So basically, that's two main principles of what this project is about. The first principle is to record it, because it's an urgent race against time, because we have so much knowledge of our elders, out there, because people have been on land for thousands of years, as you know, and thousands of years of living sustainably on country. And little they know, when colonization first hit our country, it was seen as primitive people. But it was pretty much a wrong way of looking at it. It was people were very advanced and very technical in terms of being able to live with country and be a part of country, which creates culture in that sense. So it's a really important principle to record that knowledge before it's lost, while we still have that knowledge with our elders. The second most important principle is to demonstrate that knowledge. Now, you don't know the value of traditional knowledge unless we demonstrate it and improve it and show it to you. And in a sense, on modern-day research, as we know, it's based on just recording the knowledge, put it on a database, put it on a shelf, and then it just sits there, and so forth. But in this sense, being a grassroots methodology, we're looking at implementing and providing action research and applying knowledge to demonstrate the real values of this. Now, it's a different way of doing research, or it's not really research, really, is it? What we're actually doing is we're doing that to show people the values, but in the past, research methods has been just been inside universities and not really engaging with people on the ground and making something that's going to happen and making outcomes. Because what we want to see is change. And by doing demonstration of knowledge values that have been on country for thousands of years, we're actually providing change by example and moving forward. And if we're providing change and actually doing practical things, things are more clearer in our heads. And let's face it, when we learn, and we learn practically, we learn a lot better than sitting in a room and looking at a screen and talking about something that's out there and you're actually not out there at all. So that's why it's so valuable that we draw from traditional knowledge experiences. And that way of learning has been the traditional way of learning and the traditional way of applying for thousands of years. So why aren't we doing that? And why aren't we learning from people that have been on country for that long and giving them the opportunity to demonstrate and take the opportunity to lead and take the reins in terms of doing and showing some experiences in this sense. So from recording this knowledge, after I learnt a lot of the knowledge, I spent 10 years in the bush with two old fellas. One was called Dr. Tommy George, who's at home waiting for me now. And another elder was the late Dr. George Musgrave, who we lost 2 years ago. Now, those two elders were the pioneers of this project and what I'm going to be talking about, TKRP in abbreviation, by Traditional Knowledge Revival Pathways. And basically, after those two old people taught me for 10 years, I started to look around and I started to see what was, I could see things that other people couldn't see. I could understand things that other people couldn't understand. And my only education was a high school education, So that university for me was in the bush with them old people. So I started to see the value and I started to see the importance of our young people picking that up, because they weren't picking it up. And there's a huge gap between the young people and the old people. So I thought, well, what's the best way that we can help the old fellas? Because that's what this is about. This is a tool to help the elders. It's the elders' project to get them motivated to make the first moves that we can follow. Because obviously they've been down the track that we're trying to follow, already, in a sense, in terms of not only in our lifetimes between one individual to the other, but also in terms of humanity on a bigger scale. So I thought, well, the best way to do that will be to use video cameras. Because basically the old man can go, he can talk for himself, we can record him, it's him talking, he's on the land, he can pick up that stick or the leaf and he can prepare whatever it is he's going to prepare right there, and he can do the whole knowledge transfer on videotape, while also the young people there are also doing the video recording, and they're recording it, and his own people. So he's got his own researchers in his own community, and we train communities to do this in their own communities with the elders, and that way the old people become their own researchers in their own rights, under their own terms. Whereas research in the past, where people have gone in and taken in to traditional owners and gone, oh yeah, can I write this down, or can you tell me about this or about water or whatever? And then from there the old fellow will go, well, I don't even know this person, and he want to make a PhD and become a doctor down the road. There's hundreds of doctors in Australia that have gone to see them, two old people that I've just mentioned, and made their careers out of it, of being doctors in terms of environmental management, community, whatever it may be, anthropology, all those things that you're studying abroad, and nothing happening on the ground. No changes. And how long has it been, you know? And still with government processes, 20 years later, we're going round in circles and not getting anywhere. So something's got to work, and something's got to be done in terms of providing a right methodology and a right way for our young people to steer forward too, in terms of doing something for their study that's going to present something practical. And I'll demonstrate a lot more on that as well. So using the video camera was the closest way to the traditional transfer. And the young people, not only are you just recording that knowledge, but they're also engaging right there and then in the traditional transfer as well. And that's really, really important as well, you know. So there's another value that you get out of that in that sense. And another sense, they might be fixing the water hole or doing something or burning the country and looking after the land and, you know, they're actually applying and doing the action as well. And this is important, and this is where we need to be supporting Indigenous groups and how we need to fit in to make that happen. So technology is the key in terms of, you know, reviving values of the, you know, our values, our old traditional values. And from there, technology is not a new thing. You know, technology has been invented a long time ago. You know, from the fact where you used to rub two sticks together to make fire, that is technology. You want another version? Copper that makes the electric things go through come from the earth anyway, you know? So technology on its own is not going to be enough. You need knowledge and you need old values as well. And we must maintain old values if we're going to move forward in that sense. You can never have country back the way it was. And you can never have it, you know, I wish it could, you know. I wish I could go back 200 or 300, 400 years and just go, boom, and I'm in another, and back there 400 years ago, and I'm on the land, you know, and we're just living on country, and you can never get that. But by drawing from practical baseline values of traditional knowledge into a contemporary sense, we can maintain those values and maintain our cultural integrity into the new future. And of course, that's not just looking at focusing at that claim group on their own. We're going to need everyone to help out to be a part of that. And for our future generations, I think a direction in that sense, on a cultural sense and a sense of connecting back to country is really, really important. And that's what traditional values can share with the broader community. And I don't really say people are non-Indigenous. I don't like that word, non-Indigenous. You know, for me, I've got all kind of blood in me. You know, my grandmother's Aboriginal. My father got a bit of German there, a bit of Scandinavian there, somewhere there. I'm a bit of Viking blood, I think. But I don't know where that comes from. In terms of, my father doesn't know because he's born in Australia and his grandfather born in Australia and they lost their connection, you know. So it's disconnection, you know, the people who are not connected anymore to country. It's simply not non-Indigenous, but not being connected, you know. So it's really important that we look for our future generations a way to reconnect. And the only way we can do that is to demonstrate that and show people the values and how they can feed in many different ways for many outcomes. So what this page here, this is the TKP website, and we're going to play a little film on the website.
Traditional Knowledge Recording Project is an emergent project that's based on recording the knowledge closest to the traditional transfer using technology like video cameras, so that you're showing the visual of what the elders are trying to explain through different forms of language, through body language and through verbal, and through what you see and what they show on country. There aren't many elders left around that have a lot of entire knowledge system and have been linked to the knowledge on country some time ago when people were still on country. So we're losing that knowledge and young people aren't picking that knowledge up. And also that knowledge is not recognised within the general society of Australia either. And there's no presence of it in our contemporary management. So our team has a sense of urgency, you know, to start recording that knowledge and starting to demonstrate its values, because Indigenous people and most people, even non-Indigenous people, do see traditional knowledge as a value, an important value for ongoing occupation of this country. The knowledge system played a sustainable role for thousands of years on this country, you know. and it looked after many different types of people. It spoke at least nearly 500 languages and different clan groups that lived side by side on one nation. We're not just looking at saving Indigenous knowledge for Indigenous people, more or less trying to point this knowledge out towards the issue that we're all facing, that is starting to set off alarms in terms of things like the global warming, our water qualities are going down the drain, the fire management problems in this country. Man is not different from nature. Man is nature. Man is animal, just as much as any other animal around, And we have to fit into that cycle to create that sustainability amongst the resources and amongst the country. Our aim is to start to reapply that understanding and reapply that balance and where we fit in with the land rather than, how the land can feed us and how we benefit from the land and the attitude that we get today. Getting that understanding and that spiritual sense is really important. What this really is a way of getting people back into an environment which they've detached themselves from. And by detaching themselves, they've detached a lot of human practice that's vital for the survival of country and survival of a lot of its resources. The country needs the people, and the people need the country. The reason why people are interested and feel a part of this and really want to see this project go on, because everyone is Indigenous no matter where you are from on this whole planet. And you have an instinct inside you that tells you that this is the right thing and tells you that, hey, I feel a part of this as well. Because everyone has got to come from the country and everyone has got a background where, you've lived off country and have respect and balance for people and land. And that's why it hits home no matter who you are.
So yeah, a little short clip there that can be shared, and you can see here, YouTube there. And being that we hosted it on YouTube at the moment, the project's being developed on a shoestring budget. So we're using everything we can since the year 2000 to keep this project going because funding has been very limited. And yet, we do have some funding things happening in Australia, but then again, the government's putting guidelines on that and they're telling us how we should be doing and what we should be expecting rather than letting something flourish, letting something happen. And also another thing that funders need to wake up and realize is not just about chucking money and just standing there and going, well, let's see what happens. It's about putting your shoulder behind what's working and putting everyone getting in there and putting their shoulder in there and playing a role and playing a part. Because everyone has a part to play and a role to play. And you can look at it even in terms of how big Australia is. It's a huge country. And we need everyone on board. The whole place used to be occupied with people looking after it. And now there's only people in certain spots on the map that they call cities and towns. And the rest of the places out on the land is just left. And people think that's conservation. Let's lock it up. The country will look after itself. That's not true. The country needs people and we need the knowledge to look after that. And by using the technologies, and as you've seen the YouTube hosting that, we need to use the tools that's taken our young people away too. Because what's our young people doing? They're looking on the computer, watching the YouTube, they're playing the computer games, this and that. So we need that technology to bring it back again. Fight fire with the fire. And to make knowledge cool. And it is cool stuff, I walk around there out in the country there and this and that and, and you can do things that are just amazing. And yet that's not cool. Them old people are fantastic. And we need to put them old people back in the limelight again. And the way we do that, of course, we need to use technology in that sense. What you see here is the database. And it's really dark sort of color in terms of the quality of the screen. It's not really like that. It's really nice and bright. It's pretty horrible. But you look here, you see history, animals, country, plants, spirituality, skills, techniques, and people. Now, basically, it takes up the whole of the knowledge system. And you can't just record one aspect of traditional knowledge. A lot of people are doing recordings, but they're doing just the language, or they're doing just trees and plants on medicinal uses, or they're just doing, one or two things of the knowledge. You need to do the whole entire system.
And when you had the opportunity to record knowledge, the first grant that I got was from the government in terms of recording plants. And that was at a time when they wanted to know our medicinal uses for, medicines and things like that. So they wanted something out of it, But I got that funding. When I got it, I said, well, we don't do the whole lot. So we just did what we wanted to do, and we didn't come back on what we were doing. But because what we were doing was, obviously was a lot of work and we're doing something positive, they didn't say anything. So we got away with that in that sense. But here, like we go to people in here, you'll find language in there and other things you can put in terms of people, autobiographies, kinship systems and so forth. History, of course, is where you fit museums, and we've got recordings of different museums in Australia where we take the old man and take him down to the museum and he handles all the artifacts. And then from there, with the knowledge that he's recorded down in the museum, it then links to the plant, and we go around country and we talk about the plant, where that comes from, and brings all those things in the museum to life, and it makes it a living thing again, rather than something that sits in the museum and only has 1 or 2 tags on it, like, it's a water carrier, and it was found in this part of the country in 1900. That's it, where the old man can say, oh, well, it's from this sort of tree, only the women carried this around, or, and all this extra information, and including being out there and be able to go out and look at the tree and get him making it as well, and bringing it back in a sense. So history really bring it back into a living thing. Animals being all the animals, country being all the different parts of the country, which I'll go into, spirituality, and all that sort of sense. So in country here, we have like earth resources, and that's like sand, stone, the sky, all the knowledge of the stars and the moon and the weather patterns and all that incredible knowledge. The places, such as story places and farms and ecologies. You see farms there too, because farms is historical knowledge. And you've got traditional knowledge, which is a real long line, Well, first you've got the knowledge of the earth, and that's a long, long line of knowledge. Then you've got traditional knowledge, which is also a very long line of thousands of years. And then you've got historical knowledge, which is old white fellas that have been on the country for, generations looking after farming practices, And this, when I showed this to some white fellas, farmers in Australia, they were fascinated, and they say, we want to be recorded too, because we agree with what them old people were saying, old traditional people were saying, because we were around when they were around. And so an Indigenous process that's involving everybody is what we need to start and try to demonstrate. So if we move into story places here and step into there, it'll take a while because the computer's old, and I think it's just about to break, in a sense. See, we need more funding, see? Yeah. So here you'll see all the story places here, and on there, and it just goes on and on and on. And so we go around and we record all the story places, and the story places are sacred areas of significance. And when you get all of them together, you basically make up the whole area where you're recording anyway, which is the Kukataipan country for this demonstration database that I'm showing you here now. So if we go into Low Lake there and move into one of the story places, and it's moving there slowly. On a good computer, it moves really fast and quick. The one that isn't all choked up. So as we move into Low Lake, here are all the different fields of all the knowledge systems that make up that lake. The traditional management of that lake, the traditional law of that lake, the traditional stories of that lake, the traditional name for that lake, and also management reports, and even current research that we're doing on that lake to fix it up. And over here we've got a picture of that lake and some locations and country and management notes that are different layers, and the tenure and la on there. So that's basically the front face introducing that particular area. So if we go into one of these fields here then, and we click on one of these, this is big, eh? Wish you could press the button for that. That'll be great. So there's a password there. If we just type in password, bro, because it was this is just a demonstration and showing you we might have went into sensitive knowledge, and this is a demonstration of sensitive knowledge. Up will come a field on
on a traditional management for that lake, or naming that lake. So if we double click on there, we'll play that.
White men now today, they're making the road, ruin the place up. No good, not supposed to. They shouldn't have made this road. Typical, showing everybody, showing the tourists. If they look for the stuff like this, I'm wondering.
That old fellow there, that's he's like a father to me, that old man. That's old Dr. Tommy George. And he's at home now, and, you know, he's waiting for me there. He misses me lots. So it's been 17 years now, me and the old man been together doing this project, doing this work, which is quite an amazing journey. So, yeah, that old man is talking about the lake. It was on a naming, but it was only just a demonstration. But basically he was talking about the fact that this lake was, people were running around, fishing, doing all sorts of things, driving everywhere. Now, for this particular lake called Rara, this lake was traditionally managed for thousands of years, and it was managed in a way where no one was allowed to touch anything in there. It was a sacred area. You couldn't drink the water. You couldn't throw rocks in the water. You couldn't even break twigs off trees around the lake. You couldn't go toilet there. You couldn't camp there. It was totally taboo. And this was the way it was managed for thousands of years. And they talk about conservation areas today on modern management, and they're trying to work out how we're going to do conservation. They lock areas up. And, you know, conservation is learning, you know, and they're doing that in areas. But it was being done for thousands of years. And areas that's done in a spiritual way, in a way that's connecting you a lot more to that country. And so this particular area now that we recorded it, and you obviously seen the old man was recording the knowledge, and that particular part of the bit where he recorded, he wasn't happy with what was going on. And so that came to me, and I went, well, what's the point of us recording this if we're just going to stand there and let it happen? So from there, this became a tool. We took this database, and we showed the government, and we said, well, look. And the old man was able to talk. We're using technologies, and it was in a format, like Barry mentioned before, that the government people can understand. And they can see where the old people are coming from now. So using those tools to get the message across. And in the past, the old fellow couldn't get the message across because they're flat out speaking English, you know. So from there, we're able to translate and use this to be a real powerful communication tool. So that lake now, after about a year or two of fighting, not fighting, but, you know, a year or two of negotiating and stuff, we got the management changed. Now, the interesting thing was that when it changed, when they changed the management, they said, okay, well, we'll fence it off and we'll do that. And we said, okay, you fenced it off to stop cars from driving around. But they said, but we still can't stop people from going there. That's their right. And I said, no, well, that's not the traditional management. We've got to stop people from going there. Your rangers have got to stop that. Oh, well, our rangers can actually do that unless we actually make it a restricted access area. Well, I said, well, make it a restricted access area. And then your rangers can do that. And then at the end, we got to the point, all right, finally, we got that to the point where it can work, and where the rangers, the whitefellow rangers, can actually manage it in a way that it was done our way, and we get involved in our interpretation there. And basically then, we got the traditional management back in place there now. Now, what is the benefits of that? the benefits is this. Conservation today in Australia, and I reckon in this area too, say that lake out there or anything for fishing and that, when they do a certain conservation agreement on a particular bit of country, they go, okay, this place is closed off and no one allowed to go there no more. But the native people can still do fishing. The Aboriginal people back in Australia, that's okay. They got their rights. They can go ahead and still fish there. And then I go, downtown, and then a white fellow walk up to me and he goes, "Oh, you heard about that new management? Yeah, I want to go fishing with you because then we can go and get some fish." I think, nah. Modern conservation is still dividing. They don't know what to do about it. The fact we've got traditional people there, but they're still dividing, even though they're thinking they're trying to do the right thing. At the end of the day, we're not together. That's not a solution. So in this sense, what this demonstration is about in terms of putting this low lake up, you can put it back on that face there, Baz, on that low lake face. In this sense is that we put the traditional management in there, no one allowed to go fishing there. It's a conservation area for black and white. So from there, one law for everyone to abide by reviving our traditional laws on country. And now, anyone who go fishing there, no matter who you are, you can't. And why? Because the old people said so. The land's been managed that way for thousands of years by the Kuka-Taipan people. A case study now that everyone can share, and people can go there and go, well, this is how it was managed for thousands of years. What a nice thing if we can have more examples in that sense, and showing a way where traditional values can really lay the baseline formula and really lay an opportunity to move forward on that. And these are the outcomes. While we're recording knowledge, we keep pumping out these little things and these little projects and these little things in a way that gets everyone involved. And to do this project, I got a university student to help me to do the database and design the database properly and put a better engine under the bonnet. Because I firstly designed it and it had like 112 layouts and it was just a big mess underneath. I knew where I was going though. But from there, a university student helped me put a better engine underneath there. And the clip that we showed in front of there with animations, a university student designed that for us to do that. And there's some partnerships with that. And there's many ways. And then students were so happy that they were able to support something that was real. And to do their masters or whatever it may be on something that is actually an outcome, And that's where I'm talking about, And that's what this methodology is all about. And linking people and linking everyone in there in that sense. Not only from universities to there and this and that and exchanges, but also with an exchange with Indigenous people all over the world and all over the country. And the beauty, if we're all doing the same thing, then we all understand what each other's doing and we're all moving at the same level. It's important that everything moves together. Not one thing can only get in front of the other and leave everything else behind, because then it causes confusion and everything. What are you doing up there and I'm down here? And so if we're doing all the same thing, we can move together. And many communities like at home are doing recording of knowledge and they're on their own, and I hear them, they're doing great things. But no one cares. No one knows the values of it. It's not really demonstrating very much. And then, running out of juice. So in this sense, by joining all up, it's in a way where people go, oh, you're doing that project. Oh, everyone's doing that thing. Oh, we're all linked up. Oh, you're in the documentary together. Oh, you're doing a student. Oh, they're involved too. And, there's a networking and building kinship. And we're doing like a kinship system, re-strengthening our kinship system that had been there managing country for thousands of years in a contemporary sense. See? In that way. And that's what the old people taught me in sense of how to get things moving. And that wasn't in a broad scale. That was just in our own communities, So, so what you're looking at here, folks, is basically the most advanced land management plan you're ever going to see. That just goes on and on and on. And it starts right from the roots, grassroots, and adding reports and all that sort of stuff. And you can put all the other stuff in there that other anthropologists have done and on that particular lake as well. Now we're using technology. It's based on thousands of years of experience, and it's in a format that everyone can understand. It's a presentation tool. We can rip out that section and give it to the rangers, and that's their work plan. Man, all those things. We can take bits of clips out of this out of the plants and, and make a bush tucker video and give it to the school kids. All these different things that we can do and the multiple outcomes. And in terms of fire management is one thing that we've been doing a lot of as well back at home. And back there, in terms of fire, this is just an example of research. Now, when we were out there burning country, it was on a national park area. And for years and years, the old fellow I was driving the 4-Drive and he was in the seat there and he was pointing which way to go. He was like the compass, We would point everywhere and drive along. And then the old man would be, looking and he'd be looking at the grass in the country going, oh, it's sick. And I'll be looking at him going, oh, come on, let's burn it. Because they're not burning it right. Let's show them. The old fellow go, no, boy, no. I go, why? We know it's the right thing to do. No, boy, we'd ask the boss first. All the time now, since when my grandmother was little, she was taken off country and she was made into looking after our family and she was a slave. And she was flogged when she talked her language. She was flogged when she even went and mixed in with any other Indigenous people in the country. She was put into a room when she finished work. This old man here, they ate outside in a paddock while the other workers ate inside. They ate outside. So the old people have been growing up after the past 200 years in our country thinking the boss has got to tell us first. No matter we know already, we've got to listen to the boss man. And so after years with that old man, and I was saying, well, burn it. He's going, no. And I say, and I'm getting wild too. One day we walked along and I'm driving along and the old man goes, look at the country. And I stopped and I said, burn it. And he goes, all right then. And I went, what? So I was really happy. I said, yes. So the old man jumped down and he lit a fire and he burnt and the fire went on the country. And it went for a while. And we knew where it was going to go out exactly. And we knew what it was going to do for the environment. We knew it was going to be healthy and all these things. So then the cattle owners and cattle properties of neighbouring that country came down to the waterhole and they had perfect timing. They had to turn up when we lit the fire. So they weren't at the fire side, but when we went away from the fire and went to where we were camping, they came down where we were and we went, holy hell, there they come, look, they're here. And the old man was going, oh, look, we've got to get out of here. Even though we knew we were right, still they were scared and my heart was going a little bit too, even though I knew, because you had that feeling that, hey, we're scared of these people. And so we jumped in the car and the old man's like, just get out of here, And then we drove off and then the old man goes, I forgot my port. It's back there at the camp. And the fellows at the camp. So the old fellow said, you go and get it and, I'll wait here. So I jumped out of the car. I said, okay, you stay here, old fella. And then just as I turned around to walk over to the camp and I was seeing the farmers there, I could just see the mist, the smoke coming through the trees catching, And I could see the farmers looking that way, And I walked over like this, quick one, trying to get them not to see me, picked the bag up, and they looked at me and go, you've been lighting fires around here. That's what they said. You never told us. You were supposed to tell us you're going to light those fires. And then I sat there and I went, oh yeah, but them old fellas know what they're doing. Don't worry, it's okay. It's okay. No. I ran off, I didn't hear the rest of it. And anyway, I got back, jumped in the car, took off. And I'll tell you what, we took off, And we drove along, and then we're driving back, and then Alpha's looking at me, and we're quiet, I'm looking at the window, he's looking at me, and then we look back over the horizon, and then we look forward again. Anyway, we go along, and then Alpha goes, that fire aren't going nowhere, we know where it's going. And I go, yeah, okay. So anyway, we drive, and I get home, and, and I get home, and then the next day I go to work. At that time, I was in this office that was helping me support the project at that time. And, and I went there, and on my desk was a phone. And the phone was going ring, 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 then on that Monday morning, I knew who it was. It was National Parks agencies, it was the farmers. They all wanted to kill me. They didn't want to talk to the elders. They didn't want to go into the community and discuss, hey, why did you do that? kill that fella there. He's the reason. He's telling them old people what to do. He's the one that's behind it all. Knock him out the way, and then it'll be solved. So they all was after me, and the old fellas, no, they didn't worry about them. And this is what was happening, and this was, was the attitudes. So I let that phone ring. I didn't answer the phone. The secretary would go, such and such on the phone, and I say, I'm not in at the moment. So 3 months later, I called a meeting, and I called all these people, all the farmers, and I bring them all in, and I said, okay, let's have a meeting out there on the country, in the office in Laura, and let's do this, and let's talk about what happened now. Now, they all turned up, and when I turned up, they were all there outside. The farmers were standing up, and the national parks were there, standing up, and they were all there, and they were all talking to each other, and the elders were over there standing up, and they're all segregated, they separated in a sense. And then they seen me, and it was like, the darts were coming out of their eyes. I walked into the room, set up the database, set up the fire management section that's on there, and in the format that you just seen it, and showed all the work that we were doing on the database and all the results, the burning and operation and planning. And then when I walked in the room, I could, they were ready to, really give it to me, I just opened up and started talking, put the database up, and they couldn't believe it. Their jaws dropped. And they never said one word. They didn't say one word about the fire. They didn't say one word about anything. They just sat there and just didn't realize what knowledge was there. So in that sense, using the database and using technologies, was a real important tool, and that's what our Indigenous groups need, and that's why I say it's the elders project and really important in that sense to get the elders moving on this sort of stuff. So, going out on country after that, then we would go out and we would burn the country, and we went out one day, and with this fire management, we're doing a research as well. And so we've got a research student who wants to do a PhD, and we did a fire research project on this country then, and the old fellows were the researchers, and they were co-authors in the PhD, a new way. And the PhD student was writing it for the old people. And that's what we did. And up front, we said, let's give the old fellows honorary doctorates up front. So we gave them honorary doctorates up front. That took a year of work with the universities, but it got done. So we started doing our research, and now it'll be finished this year. We lost one of the old fellows. We've got one left. But the project still goes on, and we're still finishing it. But they're still the authors, and they're going to be labelled as the authors of the thesis. So this is different ways, and ways that we look at this project starting to pan in and starting to show how we change research. Now, when we went out and look at research, thousands of dollars goes into that. Where we've been out on country in this methodology, we're out there, okay, the old fellow burnt the grass. Okay, one day he just started burning again. This was after the incident, we started to move on, So he burnt the grass and the thing went. We had the camera going and we were recording the knowledge. The young fellows there were doing the camera work and they were learning and they were burning too. Now when we were out there that day, we recorded the knowledge so it wasn't lost. We were burning the country to keep it nice and healthy. We were out there applying it right there, practically. We were teaching the young people right there firsthand. The knowledge was put into the database and stayed and can be there for hundreds of years on burning that particular type of ecosystem. That was a case study and a trial plot site for the research project. That came out of, that also, what we did out of the film also went into the fire management documentary that we did called Fire and a Story, which you'll find on the website there for $34.99 if you want to get on there and buy a copy of that. That's 6 things that came out of that in terms of research. We're getting on country and doing all that practical good, making change, and all we had was a box of matches and a full tank of fuel. There was no money that we had for that project, not 1 cent, except for the fact that we had a car and we were out there recording knowledge, And that's where academic and research needs to change to go around in terms of, it's about healing community and as well as healing the environment, And there's a lot of ways that we can do a lot of good and practical outcomes with all our efforts together, rather than it being separated. And at the moment, the National Parks is doing research on fire management right on our country, and we're not involved in it. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollars of them trying to find out what we already know. You know, and it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't, you know. Yeah. So on the website here, you can also see the communities involved. So when you get on there, you'll see the communities, and you'll see the communities listed. Now, the website isn't catching up to where the project is really at. The project is really booming and happening in other areas. But here on the website, I haven't got enough funding and the support to get the hands on the wheel, you know, to keep up the knowledge. But it's getting there, and we're keeping up as much as possible. Here is the latest one here, Moriori, which is in New Zealand, which is happening in New Zealand now. So the project's panned over to there. And in the mentorship process, the young people, the people in the communities that are already doing the work, they're flying to New Zealand and they're mentoring the projects there. The grassroots mentoring, community. And we're creating employment now for them. And they're using cameras and technologies, and they're maintaining their own knowledge systems, which is really great. Yes, okay, I'm coming. So if we click on Moriori there, and then you'll see Moriori will come up in that sense. And then in here, then you press and there's a project report and so forth. In the other one, so I'll let you have a look at that when you go home. And to get onto that, it's www.tkarp.com.au. And within the project outcomes as well, you'll find case studies, environmental case studies. And this is where the communities are showing what they're doing environmentally and sharing. And by communities in New Zealand and communities in Australia, and hopefully now communities within this area taking on the methodology, we can look at interlinking, and there's all sort of ways that we can get involved into supporting a process that we can all start to feel a part of, you know. So that's basically it in a nutshell, because I can speak all day. I can give you lessons all year if you like. Do you want to look at this? Yeah, just let me know what you want, hey. Press play.
You can't leave me now. Oh, we're going to do something about it. I'll be glad. I'll be pushing for it now. The way we're going, I have to put a fence around it or something. Keep the, now they're getting rid of the pigs. Yeah, and you get rid of the cattle. One man live out here, want to take over. Got to change it. Keep everything. You see, everything has to change. All the water be full all the time. Lilies be all. That's good. Yeah. Cool, it's very steady. You see how slow? What the wind is blowing. You see how you still burning this way, and the wind kills you. Yeah. They're going to start living earth for you, huh? That's what they're going to start learning. While we, like the old days, old grandmas, in these places like that, they go, same for the country, do the same.
National Park, what he doing here, he only looks them tourists, fishermen. Right, crocodile there, don't bugger there. And don't knock any tree. That's what they do, run away. But you don't think how religion story. What we're thinking about, oh yeah, this place no good. And the story must look at. Can't burn the grass. We burn the grass certain time. What place we want burned, there, not all over the place, because we got a mind on that story. Going to get burned story. Now, That's what we get think about all the money. But ranger, you only think but one way look after that tourist. Not to swim, not to cut the trees, not to shoot anything. It's stopping them. Well, we did the same. We're not too far from the ranger, like white fellas, but we're looking after our region. A lot of story we're thinking about. Oh, we don't cut the trees, the story there. You might we get sick. Kid believe us.
You see all them people here?
Yes, that's just a little example there. It'll go for ages otherwise. And that's just on fire management and so forth, in terms of what the elders are doing, and a little bit of water management as well. It just gives you an idea what's happening, and many communities. And as I speak, many communities at home are doing this as I speak right now, you know. And it's daytime at home at the moment. Yeah, so they're moving. Also in New Zealand, they're moving too. And here I am now today.
Water hole is very, very significant, as well as being one of the most visited spots in the whole of the Daintree National Park. And I would like the people to understand and respect what has been spoken for thousands and thousands of years.
Traditional knowledge, that's the balance. If you respect it, this knowledge, then you'll know the balance, see. But this law, where I'm saying, it's been from the start to the end, it never changed overnight, no way. That law where I'm speaking, it's from way back, it never changed halfway and then changed again and changed again. But watch for the law, it changed from there all the way till now, and at the present, maybe now they put another law up again, you know. But this law where I'm talking about this river, it's still part of the law, this river. The land is still part of the law. Everything is part of the law. And that never changed from the beginning of my ancestors till now.
So that's a preview of Water We Know, a water documentary. And because all the communities were doing the same thing, doing the same project, it was easy to do a documentary on water involving everybody. And that went to the government as part of the Cultural Indicators Waters Project, in terms of what we should be doing to manage our water systems correctly using traditional knowledge. And it was a groundbreaking way of providing that research, and the government sent us a letter saying that was fantastic. And this is what the outcomes can be when we're being practical and the more sense for change. But on that note, I'm going to wind up now. Basically, I'm hoping from this trip that, that we're going to get a small seed started here. And people go, well, how can this happen here when there's so much colonization or whatever? It's about putting a small step in first, and once you start to see practical things, then it starts to make sense. So it's not about just saying, well, it can't work here, it can't work there. Don't think like that, because it'll get us nowhere. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Bucko again, and Bucko will finish off and close this little session here. And thank you for your attention, everybody.
Thank you, Victor. And also thank you to John, Barry, Brad, and all of you who sat here through this talk about TKRP. In our Great Lakes region, Great Lakes Basin, we have a tremendous area of coverage in that basin. Lake Superior, 1,200 miles in circumference, one of the largest lakes in the whole Great Lakes system. Lakes Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. A tremendous resource to be responsible for. Our Native people have been living in this area for thousands and thousands of years, and they have many stories of those lakes, stories of the lands that surround them. The monuments like Castle Rock and the other places in the Great Lakes. We have 12 Native tribes in Michigan that are recognized by the federal government, 11 in Minnesota, 11 in Wisconsin, 128 separate tribes and bands in Ontario in the Great Lakes Basin. We also have our urban communities, and we have our rural communities and other organizations such as the Ontario Métis and Aboriginal Association, the Ontario Métis Nation, and others. To me, TKRP as a tool represents a hope, a direction for our people in the revitalization of our stories, in the language, revitalization of those stories, of how to care for the natural resources that are there. We have a rich history of fishing in these Great Lakes. The whitefish, tikmeg. We call it that because it is like those caribou. They migrate in large numbers. Whitefish does the same. TKRP is a source of light, a source of hope, as a tool for language revitalization. My wife, myself, and many others, we invited John, Barry, Brad, Victor, and Tim to observe this past weekend language immersion classes at the Bay Mills Community College. That's where John got some of his language, the good words. He uses other ones, but I'm not going to tell you what those are. He got to see who cared about our language that have been going through language classes and courses in immersion style for the past 4 years, and some for even longer. He got to see that they were older folks, 25 plus years. Only one or two that were younger than that age. Those people have a commitment to learning our language and stories. TKRP represents a method, a tool for achieving that on their own. Self-directed. The young people, Don Lyons among them, asked that I go to Australia with him to observe this program, to observe the people there and what they were doing. This represents a hope for us here in the Great Lakes region with Nishnawbe-Moin, our language, those stories. If I have anything to do about it, and I plan on having something to do about it, we will be working at establishing a program based on these models of TKRP, Traditional Knowledge Revitalization Pathways, looking at how to bring to our communities and our young people the words of our ancestors. We talk about 7 generations that had looked after us and left to us that are here today what we have. And we as Anishinaabe have to look 7 generations ahead use the tools that are available to us. Our young people have Blackberries. They have nanopods, computers, those things of Silicon Valley. That silicone comes from the earth. We can use that for the good of revitalizing our language, revitalizing our stories. And I thank these gentlemen for coming to share with us just a little bit of that. We have a lot to learn on it, but the model is there, and we can recognize how it can help. And I believe we will use it in the future here, in a not too distant future, within a year or two. It's my hope and my goal to be able to see within 5 years, without a penny available to us just yet, not one single cent, but dedication among our young people and myself. I hope to see in 3 to 5 years, 3,000 to 5,000 hours of recorded projects. So with that, I thank you for being here and being a part of this delegation's presentation. I thank John again, Barry, Brad, and Victor, and I thank you as an audience here for listening to us. Big wedge.